Lightning split the sky over the Nebraska prairie, as Nora Patterson's screams pierced through the howling tempest. The wagon that had carried her hopes and dreams for a new life westward was now engulfed in angry flames that danced and hissed against the torrential downpour, a cruel contradiction of nature's elements battling around her trapped form. Nebraska Territory. 1867, Nora had never known such terror. She'd faced many hardships in her 22 years, the loss of her parents to influenza back in Philadelphia, the dissolution of her engagement to a man who proved false, and the daunting decision to journey west alone. But nothing compared to the primal fear of being trapped in a burning wagon with no escape in sight. The journey to Nebraska City had been her chance at reinvention. With her inheritance carefully packed and her schoolteacher credentials secured, Nora had joined a wagon train heading west. When the storm hit, the wagon master had ordered everyone to make camp immediately. Scattered across the prairie, each traveler sought whatever shelter they could find. Nora had been alone when lightning struck a tree beside her wagon, sending burning branches crashing down onto her canvas cover. Now, as smoke filled her lungs and flames licked at her skirts, Nora fought to free herself from the tangle of supplies that had shifted during her panicked movements. The heat was becoming unbearable, her vision blurring as the smoke thickened around her. "Hello? Anybody in there?" A deep voice called through the roaring flames. "Help me, please," Nora cried, her voice cracking from the smoke. Without warning, the burning wagon flap was torn aside, revealing a tall silhouette against the storm-dark sky. A man's strong hands reached inside, grasping her forearms with firm yet gentle pressure. "Hold on, madam. I've got you," he assured, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. In one powerful movement, he pulled her from the inferno, cradling her against his chest as they tumbled backward into the mud. They rolled several times, putting distance between themselves and the wagon just as the flames reached Nora's crates of books, causing an explosion of burning paper to erupt into the night sky. Gasping for breath, Nora found herself staring into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weather-bronzed face beneath a sodden hat. Rain streamed down his features, plastering dark hair to his forehead as he assessed her condition with concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, helping her to sit up. I don't think so," Nora managed, though her throat burned with each breath. "My belongings are just things," the stranger completed firmly. "Things can be replaced, you cannot." Lightning illuminated the scene again, allowing Nora a clearer view of her rescuer. He wasn't dressed like the other men from her wagon train. His attire was that of a working cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim trousers, a simple cotton shirt now soaked through, and a bandana around his neck. His hat, though dripping with rain, retained the distinctive shape of a cowboy's broad brim. "Zachary Jenkins," he introduced himself, rising to his feet and offering his hand. "Most folks call me Zach." "Nora Patterson," she replied, accepting his assistance to stand. Her legs trembled beneath her, partly from shock and partly from the realization of how close she'd come to perishing in the flames. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Jenkins." "Staying alive will be thanks enough," he answered, his expression grim as they both turned to watch her wagon become fully consumed by fire despite the rain. "Where's the rest of your party? You shouldn't be out here alone. We scattered when the storm hit." The wagon master thought it safer than staying grouped together in the lightning. Nora's voice faltered as she realized the gravity of her situation. "Everything I own was in that wagon. My clothes, my teaching supplies, my money. We need to get you somewhere dry," Zach interrupted, scanning the darkened prairie. "My camp's not far. It's not much, but it's sheltered, and I've got coffee and provisions." Nora hesitated, acutely aware that following a stranger, especially a man, to his camp was hardly proper. But the prairie in a thunderstorm offered no alternatives, and her body was beginning to shiver violently from shock and cold. "I promise you'll be safe, Miss Patterson," Zach added, seeming to read her thoughts. "I'm just offering shelter from the storm. Come morning, we'll find your wagon train." Another crash of thunder decided for her. "Lead the way, Mr. Jenkins," she said, wrapping her arms around herself as they set off into the darkness. Zach's camp proved to be a small but well-organized setup beneath an overhang of rock that provided shelter from the rain. A canvas had been expertly strung to extend the protected area, beneath which a small fire still smoldered in a stone-lined pit. A sturdy-looking paint horse stood nearby under its own canvas shelter, seemingly unbothered by the storm. "Sit here," Zach directed, gesturing to a bedroll near the fire as he quickly built up the flames with dry wood he kept under the canvas. "I'll get you something warm to drink and some dry clothes." The fire's heat was a blessing against Nora's chilled skin. As Zach rummaged through his packs, she took the opportunity to better observe her rescuer. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hardship and solitude. Despite his rough appearance, there was a gentleness in how he handled his possessions and spoke to his horse that suggested a kind nature. "Here," he said, returning with a flannel shirt and woolen trousers that would clearly be much too large for her frame. "They're clean, at least. I'll turn my back while you change." Once Nora had changed into the dry clothing, rolling up sleeves and pant legs to accommodate her smaller frame, she felt warmth returning to her limbs. Zach handed her a tin cup of coffee laced with something stronger that burned pleasantly down her throat. "Whiskey," he explained, noting her surprise. "Medicinal purposes only." "Are you a doctor, Mr. Jenkins?" she asked, taking another small sip. A shadow passed over his features. "No, madam, just a cowboy who's seen enough mishaps to know how to handle the aftermath." "Well, I'm grateful for your experience," Nora said sincerely. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. I was tracking some strays when I saw the lightning hit. Figured I'd better check if anyone needed help." He settled on the other side of the fire, maintaining a respectful distance. "What brings you to Nebraska Territory, Miss Patterson? Not many women travel alone." "I wasn't alone until today," she clarified. "I was with the Wilson wagon train, heading to Nebraska City. I've accepted a position as the school teacher there." Zach nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his features. "Nebraska City's growing fast. They'll be glad to have someone educated for the children." "And you?" Nora asked. "What brings you to this particular patch of prairie during a thunderstorm?" "I work for the Cross T Ranch about 15 miles west of Nebraska City," he explained. "Was sent to find some cattle that broke through fencing during the last storm. Found them too, but then this weather blew in." He gestured toward the dark prairie beyond their shelter. "Thought it best to wait it out." They fell into companionable silence, listening to the rain diminish from a downpour to a gentle patter. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, Nora found herself oddly at ease in this stranger's presence. Perhaps it was the shock, or perhaps it was simply that Zachary Jenkins exuded an aura of dependability that was impossible to ignore. "You should try to get some sleep, Miss Patterson," Zach eventually suggested. "I'll keep watch. Tomorrow we'll head toward the trail and try to find your wagon train. And if we don't, then I'll escort you to Nebraska City myself." The simple declaration held no hint of boasting or ulterior motive, just a straightforward commitment to see her safely to her destination. Nora settled onto the bedroll, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. Her last conscious thought before drifting into sleep was that despite losing everything she owned, She might have gained something far more valuable, a friend in this wild, unfamiliar territory. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the prairie clean during the night. Nora awoke to the aroma of coffee and bacon, finding Zach already up and tending to breakfast over a rekindled fire. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice carrying the slight raspiness of someone who hadn't spoken much yet. "Hope you're hungry. Trail food's simple but filling." Nora sat up, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the borrowed clothes that swam on her slight frame. "Good morning." "Yes, I'm famished actually. Thank you." After a breakfast of bacon, hardtack softened in coffee, and dried apples, they broke camp efficiently. Zach insisted Nora ride his horse, Painter, while he walked alongside, leading them back toward the main trail. "I can't take your horse," Nora protested. "You're not taking him. I'm still holding the reins," Zach pointed out with a hint of humor. "Besides, those boots of yours aren't made for prairie walking." He was right. Her city-bought boots, chosen more for appearance than practicality, were already showing signs of wear from the journey west. Still, she felt guilty watching him stride purposefully through the tall grass while she sat comfortably on horseback. As they traveled, Nora shared more about her life in Philadelphia, her childhood as the daughter of a successful merchant, her education at a women's seminary, and the series of events that had led her to seek a new beginning in Nebraska. "After my parents died, I discovered my fiancé was more interested in my inheritance than my companionship," she explained, surprising herself with her candor to this near stranger. "When I confronted him, he admitted he'd been courting me on his mother's instruction for financial advantage." "His loss," Zach commented simply, his eyes scanning the horizon rather than looking at her directly. Nora appreciated his restraint. Most people offered effusive sympathy or awkward platitudes when hearing of her troubles. Zach's matter-of-fact response felt refreshingly honest. "What about you?" she asked. "Have you always been a cowboy?" A complexity crossed his features. "Not always. Grew up in Missouri. My father had a small farm, taught me to work with horses. Then the war came." The war. There was no need to specify which one. The Civil War had touched everyone's lives in some way. "Which side?" Nora asked carefully. "Union," he replied. "Though plenty of neighbors went Confederate, made for difficult times when we all came home." He paused, then added, "Those who did come home." They crested a small rise, and Zach pointed toward a plume of smoke in the distance. "That might be your wagon train making breakfast." Hope surged through Nora, followed quickly by anxiety. How would she explain her situation? What would she do without her possessions? And strangest of all, why did she feel a peculiar reluctance at the prospect of parting from this cowboy who'd saved her life? As they drew closer to the smoke, however, it became clear this wasn't the Wilson wagon train. Instead, they found a single covered wagon with a small family, a man, his wife, and 3 young children making their morning meal. "Good morning," Zach called, approaching openly with his free hand visible. Out here, strangers approached with caution and clear intent. The family looked up, the man reaching for his rifle before noting Nora's presence and relaxing slightly. "Morning. You folks lost?" "Not lost," Zach replied. "But the lady here got separated from the Wilson train during last night's storm. Her wagon caught fire. I was hoping you might have seen where they made camp." The woman of the family gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, you poor dear. Are you hurt?" "No, thanks to Mr. Jenkins," Nora assured her, sliding down from Painter with Zach's assistance. "He pulled me from the wagon before the flames spread." The family introduced themselves as the Carpenters, heading to Oregon Territory. They hadn't seen the Wilson train, but they'd passed through Nebraska City just days before and shared what news they had. "Town's growing fast," Mr. Carpenter informed them. "They've built that school they were planning. Townspeople were mighty excited about the teacher coming." Nora exchanged a glance with Zach. "That would be me," she explained. "Though I fear I'll arrive without the books and supplies I promised." Mrs. Carpenter clicked her tongue sympathetically. "You poor thing. Well, we don't have much, but I can spare a dress at least. Can't have you arriving in men's clothing, though you wear them better than most would." Nora blushed, suddenly self-conscious again about her borrowed attire. "That's very kind of you." While Nora changed into Mrs. Carpenter's spare dress behind the wagon, Zach consulted with Mr. Carpenter about the likely route the Wilson train might have taken. "If they were smart, they'd have headed for Cottonwood Creek to wait out the storm," Mr. Carpenter suggested. "Good water and some tree cover there. It's about 5 miles east." After thanking the Carpenters and sharing their morning coffee, Zach and Nora continued their search, now heading east toward Cottonwood Creek. The day grew warmer, the spring sun drying the last of the previous night's rainfall from the waving grasses. "You don't have to continue with me," Nora said as they walked, she once again riding Painter despite her protests. "I'm sure you have duties back at your ranch." "The strays can wait another day," Zach replied. "I'm not leaving you until I know you're safe with your people or in Nebraska City." His stubborn chivalry both warmed and frustrated her. "I don't wish to be a burden." "You're not," he said simply, in that direct way of his that brooked no argument. They reached Cottonwood Creek by midday but found no sign of the Wilson train. Zach frowned as he surveyed the area, which showed evidence of recent camping but no indication of which direction the travelers had gone. They might have pressed on toward Nebraska City, he theorized. "It's only about a day's journey from here." Nora nodded, fighting disappointment. She'd hoped to recover some of her fellow travelers and perhaps some of her possessions that might have been stored in other wagons. "Then I suppose we should do the same." They rested by the creek through the hottest part of the day, sharing a simple meal from Zach's provisions. As Nora watched him care for Painter, ensuring the horse was watered and comfortable before seeing to his own needs, she found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, capable man. "How long have you worked at the Cross T?" she asked as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Going on 3 years now," Zach replied. "It's good work, fair boss, decent pay." "And before that, after the war, I mean." He hesitated, then answered, "Drifted mostly. Tried my hand at different things, mining in Colorado for a spell, ranch work in Kansas. Even rode with a cattle drive to Abilene once." His expression turned reflective. "Been looking for somewhere that felt right, I suppose." "And does the Cross T feel right?" Nora asked, genuinely curious. "More than anywhere else so far," he admitted. "Nebraska's got good land, good people mostly. Less troubled by the war than some places." They set out again as the afternoon heat began to wane, making steady progress toward Nebraska City. As twilight approached, Zach selected a suitable camping spot near a small stream, efficiently setting up their shelter for the night. "I'll need to hunt us something for dinner," he said, checking his rifle. "Our provisions won't last another day." "I can help prepare the camp," Nora offered, determined to contribute. Zach nodded, handing her his flint and steel. "If you could get a fire going, that would be helpful. Stay alert while I'm gone. If you hear anything concerning, there's a revolver in my saddlebag." After he departed, Nora busied herself gathering dried kindling and larger pieces of wood for the fire. She'd never been particularly skilled at wilderness survival, but her journey west had taught her the basics. After several attempts, she managed to spark the kindling into flame, carefully building it into a respectable campfire. Proud of her accomplishment, she began clearing an area for their bedrolls when a rustling in the nearby brush froze her in place. Heart pounding, She slowly turned toward the sound, trying to determine whether it was just wildlife or something more threatening. "Hello." She called tentatively, backing toward Painter and the saddlebags containing the promised revolver. The brush parted to reveal not a wild animal or bandit, but a young boy of perhaps 12 years, thin and dirty with a wary expression. "Who are you?" the boy demanded, keeping his distance. "I'm Nora Patterson," she answered, relaxing slightly though remaining cautious. "And who might you be?" "Sam Hollister," he replied, eyeing the campfire with obvious longing. "You alone out here, madam?" "No, my companion has gone hunting. He'll return shortly." Nora studied the boy, noting his ragged clothing and the hollow look in his eyes that spoke of hunger. "Are you lost, Sam?" The boy shook his head. "Not lost. Running." "Running from what? From who?" he corrected. "My uncle. He ain't a good man." Before Nora could question him further, Zach returned to camp, a pair of rabbits in hand. He stopped short at the sight of the boy, his expression cautious but not threatening. "Evening," he greeted calmly. "Didn't expect to find company." "This is Sam," Nora explained. "He's in some trouble." Zach assessed the situation with a glance, then nodded toward the fire. "Well, Sam, if you're hungry, we've got rabbit, plenty to share." The tension in the boy's shoulders eased slightly. "Yes, sir, I am hungry." As Zach prepared the rabbits for cooking, Sam gradually shared his story. His parents had died of fever the previous winter, leaving him in the care of an uncle who treated him more as free labor than family, accompanied by frequent beatings when the boy failed to meet expectations. "Ran away 3 days ago," Sam explained, devouring his portion of rabbit with barely restrained desperation. "Been living off berries and whatever I could find." Nora exchanged a concerned glance with Zach. Neither needed to speak their thoughts aloud. They couldn't in good conscience return this child to an abusive situation. "Where was your uncle headed?" Zach asked. "Nebraska City. He's got business there, something about cattle." A thoughtful expression crossed Zach's face. "What's your uncle's name, son?" "Thaddeus Hollister," Sam replied, his voice dropping as if the mere utterance of the name might summon the man. Zach's eyebrows rose slightly. "Tall fellow, beard, missing 2 fingers on his left hand," Sam nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Know of him," Zach clarified, his expression darkening. "He's trying to arrange a cattle deal with my employer at the Cross T, has a reputation for sharp practices." Nora understood the implicit meaning. Thaddeus Hollister was not well regarded even in business circles. If his treatment of his own nephew was any indication, the man's character was deeply flawed. "What will you do now, Sam?" she asked gently. The boy shrugged, attempting nonchalance though fear flickered in his eyes. "Keep moving, I guess. Find work somewhere he won't look for me." "A boy your age traveling alone is in considerable danger," Nora pointed out. "Perhaps in Nebraska City we could find someone who—" "No," Sam interrupted, panic edging his voice. "He'll be there. He'll find me," and he stopped, swallowing hard. Zach set aside his tin plate, his expression pensive. "The foreman at the Cross T has a son about your age. They've been looking for help with the younger stock." He glanced at Nora as if seeking her opinion on his unspoken suggestion. "Would you like that, Sam?" Nora asked. "Working with animals at Mr. Jenkins' ranch." Hope and suspicion warred in the boy's expression. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Sometimes folks just need a chance," Zach said simply. "I got one once when I needed it. Seems right to pass that along." That night, with Sam sleeping soundly nearby, Nora and Zach spoke quietly by the fire. "That was a kind offer," Nora observed. "Will your foreman truly accept him?" "Bill Morgan's a fair man," Zach replied. "He'll give the boy a chance if I vouch for him. And if this uncle is as bad as he seems, Bill won't stand for him trying to reclaim the boy without proper cause." Nora studied Zach's profile in the firelight, wondering at the experiences that had shaped this man who so readily extended help to strangers. "Who gave you your chance?" she asked softly, recalling his earlier words. Zach was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "After the war I was lost, not just in location, in myself." His hand absently rubbed his left thigh, and Nora noticed for the first time a slight stiffness in his movement. "Took a bullet at Chickamauga. Nothing compared to what some suffered, but enough to leave me damaged goods for the kind of work I knew." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Was drowning my sorrows in a Kansas saloon when a cattle baron named Thomas Jenkins found me. Said he needed men who could think, not just ride. Gave me a job. Later, when he died without heirs, he left me his name and enough money to make a fresh start." A sad smile touched his lips. "Figured the least I could do was honor him by living decent." The revelation of his adopted surname touched Nora deeply. Here was a man who had suffered loss, yet found the capacity to rebuild his life with dignity, and now extended the same opportunity to others. "Nebraska City is fortunate I lost my supplies," she said after a moment, "as it means I shall arrive with something far more valuable, the knowledge that such good people exist in my new home." Zach's eyes met hers across the flames, a complexity of emotion in their blue depths that made her breath catch. "You would have discovered that regardless, Miss Patterson. You strike me as someone who sees the best in others." "Not always," she admitted. "But I'm learning to trust my instincts again." "And what do those instincts tell you now?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither was quite ready to articulate. "That tomorrow will bring challenges," Nora answered carefully, "but also opportunities." Zach nodded, accepting her measured response. "We should rest. It'll be a full day's journey to reach Nebraska City tomorrow." As Nora settled onto her bedroll, she found herself contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her wagon and possessions, while devastating, had led her to cross paths with Zachary Jenkins, a man who awakened feelings she'd thought safely buried after her previous heartbreak. Whether those feelings would lead anywhere remained to be seen, but for the first time in many months, Nora found herself looking forward to the unknown future with anticipation rather than dread. The journey to Nebraska City, the following day, proved more eventful than anticipated. They'd been traveling for several hours, with Nora and Sam taking turns riding Painter while Zach continued on foot, when they spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon moving rapidly in their direction. "Riders," Zach observed, his hand moving to his rifle. "A fair number of them." As the dust cloud drew nearer, they could make out the shapes of men on horseback, at least half a dozen, moving with purpose across the prairie. "Could be a patrol from the fort," Zach theorized, though his expression remained vigilant. "Or could be trouble." "My uncle might have men looking for me," Sam suggested, his young face tight with fear. Nora exchanged a concerned glance with Zach. They were exposed on the open prairie with nowhere to hide or take cover. Their best option was to continue forward and hope the approaching riders were friendly. As the riders drew closer, Nora felt relief wash through her as she recognized the lead wagon and several familiar faces. "It's the Wilson train," she exclaimed. "They must have been searching for me." Indeed, when the wagon train leader, Harold Wilson, spotted their small party, he raised his hand in greeting and directed his horse toward them at a gallop. "Miss Patterson," he called as he approached. "Thank the Lord you're alive. We feared the worst when we couldn't find you after the storm." The reunion was emotional as Nora's fellow travelers surrounded her with relief and questions. She explained about the lightning strike, the fire, and Zach's timely rescue, introducing him and Sam to the group. "We searched for you yesterday morning, Mrs. Wilson explained, but found only the burned remains of your wagon. With the storm having washed away most tracks, we couldn't determine what had happened. Some feared you'd perished in the fire." "The good Lord sent Mr. Jenkins to my aid," Nora said, smiling gratefully at Zach, who stood slightly apart from the group, his natural reserve evident among so many strangers. To Nora's delight, she discovered that several of her trunks had been distributed among other wagons before the storm for better weight distribution. While her wagon and many possessions were indeed lost, she hadn't lost everything as she'd feared. "Your books and teaching supplies were in the Johnsons' wagon," Mrs. Wilson informed her. "And your trunk of personal items is with the Millers. We've been continuing toward Nebraska City, planning to deliver them to you or—" She hesitated, "to make arrangements if necessary." Harold Wilson approached Zach, extending his hand. "We owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Jenkins. Miss Patterson is greatly valued among our company." Zach accepted the handshake with a nod. Any decent man would have done the same. As the group prepared to continue their journey together, Nora found herself torn between relief at reuniting with her traveling companions and a strange reluctance to return to her place among the wagon train. Traveling with Zach, despite the circumstances, had awakened something in her that she was hesitant to relinquish. "You'll be safer with your people now," Zach said quietly as she collected her recovered belongings. "They can see you safely to Nebraska City." Nora glanced at him, detecting something like regret in his expression. "Will you not travel with us? It's on your way back to the Cross T, isn't it?" "It is," he acknowledged, "and I've still got young Sam to settle." The boy in question stood nearby, watching the wagon train with visible apprehension, clearly worried about continuing to a destination where his uncle might be found. An idea formed in Nora's mind. "Mr. Wilson," she called to the wagon master, "would you permit Mr. Jenkins and Sam to travel with us to Nebraska City? Mr. Jenkins has been instrumental in my survival, and the boy is in need of protection." Harold Wilson considered the request, then nodded. "Of course. We'd be honored to have them join us. Safety in numbers out here." The journey resumed with Nora once again among the wagon train, though she found herself repeatedly seeking Zach's company as they traveled. She introduced him to the families she'd befriended during the journey, noting with pleasure how the other women nodded approvingly at his courteous manners, despite his rough exterior. Sam gradually relaxed among the other children, particularly enjoying the company of the Johnson's son, who was close to his age. Watching the boy's transformation from frightened runaway to animated youth reinforced Nora's belief that Zach's offer of work at the Cross T was exactly what Sam needed. That evening, as the wagon train made camp, Nora found a moment to speak privately with Zach, who was tending to paint her a little apart from the main gathering. "Thank you for agreeing to continue with the train," she said, approaching him with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. He glanced up from brushing the horse. "Seemed the sensible choice, for Sam's sake." "Only for Sam's?" Nora asked, then immediately felt her cheeks warm at her own boldness. Zach's hand stilled on the brush, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "No," he admitted after a moment. "Not only for Sam." The simple acknowledgement shifted something between them, an unspoken recognition that their brief acquaintance had grown into something neither had anticipated. "I've been thinking," Nora began carefully, "about what awaits in Nebraska City. My position as schoolteacher comes with a small cottage, according to the town council's letter. It will be quite a change from Philadelphia." "You'll adapt," Zach said with confidence. "You've shown considerable strength these past days." "Necessity is a powerful motivator," she replied with a small smile. "But I confess I'm nervous about arriving with so little preparation. Many of my teaching materials were lost in the fire." "The town will help you," he assured her. "Western communities pull together when there's need. It's how we survive out here." The way he said "we," including himself among the Western community rather than as an outsider, struck Nora. "How often do you visit Nebraska City?" "Every few weeks. The ranch sends men in for supplies and to handle business in town." He returned to brushing painter, though his movements seemed more deliberate now. "I could check on you, make sure you're settling in properly." The offer, delivered with studied casualness, warmed Nora more than she cared to admit. "I would welcome that," she replied softly. They reached Nebraska City the following afternoon, the settlement appearing on the horizon as a collection of wooden structures along the Missouri River. Though modest compared to Philadelphia, the town showed signs of prosperity and growth that impressed Nora. Main Street boasted several substantial buildings, including a hotel, general store, and the small schoolhouse where she would soon be teaching. As the wagon train rolled into town, curious locals emerged to greet the newcomers. Nora found herself the center of attention when Harold Wilson announced the arrival of the new schoolteacher, prompting several town council members to step forward with enthusiastic welcomes. "Miss Patterson, we'd begun to worry when the earlier wagons arrived without you," said a portly gentleman who introduced himself as Mayor George Whitaker. "We're delighted you've made it safely, despite the trials we've heard you encountered." "I was fortunate to have assistance," Nora replied, gesturing toward Zach, who stood a few paces away, Sam at his side. "Mr. Jenkins saved my life when my wagon caught fire during the storm." The mayor's expression shifted subtly as he recognized Zach. "Jenkins from the Cross T, isn't it? Thomas Cross speaks highly of you." Zach nodded respectfully. "Mr. Cross is a good employer." "Well, we're in your debt for bringing our teachers safely to us," the mayor continued, though Nora detected a certain reservation in his manner that hadn't been present when addressing her. "The school is prepared for Miss Patterson's arrival. Term is set to begin in 2 weeks, which should give you time to settle in, my dear." As the mayor led Nora toward her new residence, she glanced back at Zach, who remained with the wagons, his expression unreadable. She wanted to invite him to accompany her, to include him in this moment of arrival, but the social constraints were clear. A single woman newly arrived in town could not properly invite a bachelor to her home without causing talk. The cottage provided for her use proved to be a tidy 2-room structure behind the schoolhouse, modestly furnished but clean and welcoming. The town council wives had prepared it with fresh linens and basic provisions, a kindness that brought tears to Nora's eyes after the hardships of recent days. "It's perfect," she told Mayor Whitaker sincerely. "Please convey my gratitude to everyone involved in preparing it." "There will be a welcome supper at the church tomorrow evening," the mayor informed her. "The whole town is eager to meet you properly. For now, I'll leave you to rest and settle in." Once alone, Nora sat on the edge of the simple bed, emotions washing over her in waves, relief at reaching her destination safely, gratitude for the warm welcome, excitement about her new position. And beneath it all, a nagging concern about Zach and Sam and what would happen to them now. A knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. Opening it, she found Mrs. Wilson and several other women from the wagon train, arms laden with the recovered trunks containing her remaining possessions. "We thought you'd want these straight away," Mrs. Wilson explained, setting down a trunk. "And we wanted to make sure you were truly settled before we continued on." "That's very kind," Nora said, genuinely touched by their concern. "Please come in for a moment." As the women helped arrange her belongings, Mrs. Wilson drew Nora aside. "That cowboy of yours seems a decent sort," she observed quietly. "He's not my cowboy," Nora protested, though the description sent an unexpected thrill through her. Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly. "Perhaps not yet. But I've seen how you look at each other, and after what you've been through together." She patted Nora's hand. "Just be careful, dear. Men like that solitary type sometimes find it hard to settle in one place. Make sure your heart is protected." After the women departed, Nora unpacked her salvaged possessions, gratefully noting that most of her teaching materials had survived. As she worked, her thoughts continually returned to Zach. Would he simply return to the Cross T now that she was safely delivered? The prospect left her feeling strangely bereft. Evening was settling over Nebraska City when another knock came at her door. Opening it, Nora found Zach standing there, hat in hand, with Sam hovering nervously behind him. "Mr. Jenkins," she greeted, unable to contain her smile. "And Sam." "Please come in." "We won't stay," Zach said, remaining on the threshold. "Just wanted to make sure you were properly settled before we head to the hotel for the night." "Hotel?" Nora questioned. "I thought you'd be returning to the Cross T tomorrow," he clarified. "Need to speak with Thomas Cross about Sam here, and the boy could use a proper meal and bath before I present him." Sam made a face at the mention of a bath, but didn't protest, a sign of how much he'd come to respect Zach in their short acquaintance. "I'm glad you're staying overnight," Nora said, then hastened to add, "for Sam's sake, of course. He deserves some comfort after his ordeal." A flicker of amusement crossed Zach's features. "Of course. There's a welcome supper for me at the church tomorrow evening," Nora continued. Perhaps you could attend before returning to the ranch. The whole town will be there, I'm told." Zach hesitated, and Nora feared she'd overstepped. Men like him rarely sought social gatherings, particularly those dominated by town residents who might view cowboys with suspicion. "I'd be honored," he surprised her by saying. "Assuming Mr. Cross doesn't have urgent business for me." Their eyes held for a moment too long to be casual, and Nora felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "Good," she managed. "That's good." After they departed, Nora moved to her small window, watching Zach and Sam walk toward the town's modest hotel. There was something compelling about Zach's tall figure moving through the twilight, something that called to her in ways she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't merely gratitude for his rescue, though that certainly formed part of her regard. It was something deeper, a recognition of qualities she admired and respected. But Mrs. Wilson's warning echoed in her mind. Men like Zach, shaped by war and hardship, accustomed to solitude, didn't easily adapt to settled life or conventional relationships. And Nora had come to Nebraska City specifically to build stability after the chaos of her past year. Allowing herself to develop feelings for a cowboy who might never want the same things she did seemed foolhardy at best. Still, as she prepared for bed in her new home, Nora couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at the prospect of seeing him at tomorrow's supper. For now, she would simply enjoy the unexpected friendship that had bloomed amid disaster, without expecting more than Zach was prepared to give. The following day brought a flurry of activity as Nora was formally introduced to the school board and shown the schoolhouse where she would soon be teaching. The building was simple but sturdy, with rows of wooden desks for students and a larger desk at the front for her use. A blackboard covered most of one wall, and shelves along another held a modest collection of books. "It's not what you might be accustomed to from Eastern schools," the board chairman, Mr. Peterson, acknowledged, "but we're adding to our resources each year." The children are eager for learning, though their attendance can be irregular during planting and harvest times. I understand, Nora assured him. Education must accommodate the realities of life here. I'm prepared to be flexible. As she discussed curriculum and expectations with the board members, Nora's thoughts occasionally strayed to Zach. Had he spoken with his employer about Sam yet? Would he truly attend the supper tonight, or would ranch duties call him away? Her questions were answered that afternoon when she encountered Sam on Main Street, the boy looking remarkably different after a bath and haircut, dressed in new clothes that still had the stiffness of items fresh from a store shelf. "Miss Patterson," he called, waving enthusiastically. "Mr. Jenkins took me to meet Mr. Cross this morning. I'm to start at the ranch next week." "That's wonderful news, Sam," Nora replied, genuinely pleased for the boy. "And you look very handsome in your new attire." Sam beamed with pride. "Mr. Cross said a ranch hand needs proper gear. He even ordered me boots that'll be ready next month." "Where is Mr. Jenkins now?" "At the livery, seeing to painter and some business for Mr. Cross." Sam glanced down the street toward the stables. "He said to tell you he'll see you at the supper tonight." Relief and excitement mingled in Nora's breast at this confirmation. "I look forward to it, and to hearing more about your new position." The church supper that evening proved to be a lively affair, with seemingly the entire population of Nebraska City gathered to welcome their new schoolteacher. Nora wore her best surviving dress, a blue cotton with white trim that complemented her dark hair and fair complexion. She was introduced to so many people that names and faces began to blur together, though she did her best to remember the parents of her future pupils. Throughout it all, she found herself repeatedly glancing toward the church doors, watching for Zach's arrival. When he finally appeared, the contrast between him and the townspeople was immediately apparent. Though he'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, his clothes were clean, his hair neatly combed, and he'd shaved his trail stubble. There was an unmistakable quality about him that marked him as different. It wasn't just his attire, which was practical rather than fashionable, but his bearing alert, self-contained, and slightly wary, like a wild creature that never fully relaxed in unfamiliar territory. Several heads turned to observe him as he entered, conversations momentarily pausing before resuming with increased volume. Nora noticed some of the town's young women eyeing him with interest and felt an unexpected stab of possessiveness. She excused herself from her current conversation and moved toward him, pleased when his serious expression warmed at the sight of her. "You came," she said, unable to keep the delight from her voice. "I said I would," he replied simply. Before they could continue their conversation, Mayor Whitaker approached, his manner jovial though his eyes assessed Zach with careful scrutiny. "Jenkins, didn't expect to see you at our little gathering. Thomas Cross keep you too busy for socializing most times, doesn't he?" "Mr. Cross is a fair employer," Zach answered evenly. "He understands the importance of community events." Of course," the mayor nodded, though skepticism tinged his affability. "Miss Patterson tells us you're quite the hero, rescuing her from that burning wagon." "The town is grateful. Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps," the mayor conceded, though his tone suggested doubt. "Well, enjoy the supper. Mrs. Whitaker's apple pie won the county fair last year, not to be missed." As the mayor moved away, Nora noticed the slight tension in Zach's shoulders. "I'm sorry if you're uncomfortable," she said softly. "Small towns can be observant." "I'm used to it," Zach assured her, though his gaze continued to sweep the room with habitual vigilance. "People are curious about outsiders. You're hardly an outsider. You work at the largest ranch in the area." A sad smile touched his lips. Cowboys are always outsiders to town folk, Miss Patterson. We belong to a different world." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Sam, who arrived with Mr. Cross, the ranch owner himself. Thomas Cross was an imposing figure in his 60s, with silver hair and the weathered complexion of a man who'd spent decades under western skies. "Miss Patterson," Cross greeted her with a courteous nod. "A pleasure to meet the woman my best hand risked his life to save. Zach here isn't one for exaggeration, but young Sam has been quite colorful in describing your adventure." Nora smiled at Sam's enthusiasm. "I fear the excitement was mostly terror on my part, Mr. Cross. Your best hand deserves full credit for any heroism involved." Cross chuckled, clapping Zach on the shoulder. "Jenkins makes a habit of doing the right thing when others might look the other way. It's why I value him." He glanced between them with perceptive eyes. "And why I've granted his request for more regular trips to town over the coming months. Someone needs to check on young Sam's progress, after all." Nora's heart leapt at this news, though she maintained a composed exterior. "That's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Cross. Not entirely altruistic," the older man admitted with a wink. "Town's growing, good business opportunities developing. Having Zach represent the ranch's interests here makes sense." He turned to Zach. "Speaking of which, I need to discuss the Hollister proposal with Peterson before we leave. Join me when you're ready." As Cross departed, Nora raised an eyebrow at Zach. "The Hollister proposal, not Sam's uncle, surely?" "The very same," Zach confirmed grimly. "He's been trying to secure a cattle contract with Cross T, offering suspiciously favorable terms that have Mr. Cross wary." "Does he know about Sam?" "Not yet," Zach replied, "but Mr. Cross isn't a man who tolerates mistreatment of children. When he learns the full story, Hollister will find his business prospects in Nebraska Territory suddenly limited." The protectiveness in his voice stirred something deep within Nora. Here was a man who lived by a code of honor, not because it was socially expected, but because it was fundamentally who he was. They were joined then by several of Nora's future students and their parents, eager to meet the cowboy who had rescued their new teacher. Zach handled the attention with surprising grace, answering children's excited questions about life on the ranch with patience and even humor. Watching him interact with the townsfolk, Nora saw his initial reserve gradually ease. Though he would never be gregarious, there was a genuine warmth to his interactions that belied his taciturn reputation. The realization that she might be one of the few people to have glimpsed this side of him filled her with a quiet joy. As the evening progressed, they found moments to speak privately, sharing observations about the town and its inhabitants. Nora was struck by Zach's perceptiveness and the thoughtful nature of his comments. Here was a man who observed carefully and judged rarely qualities she deeply respected. "Will you truly be visiting town regularly?" she asked during a lull in the festivities. "If you'd welcome such visits," he replied, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. "I would," Nora admitted, abandoning pretense. "Very much." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability quickly masked yet unmistakably present. "Then, I'll come." The simple promise contained worlds of meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. For now, it was enough to know that their paths would continue to cross, that the connection formed in crisis would have opportunity to develop in calmer circumstances. As the evening drew to a close, Zach accompanied Nora to her cottage, maintaining a proper distance that would give no cause for gossip yet remaining close enough for private conversation. "When do you return to the Cross T?" she asked as they approached her door. "At first light," he answered. "There's work waiting and the cattle won't herd themselves." Nora nodded, trying to mask her disappointment. And Sam, will he go with you in a week or so? Mr. Cross wants him to have proper gear first, and there are arrangements to be made at the ranch. Zach hesitated, then added, the foreman's wife will be watching over him initially. She's a good woman, lost a son to fever last year and has been mothering every young ranch hand since. The consideration touched Nora deeply. You've changed his life, you know, given him hope when he had none. Zach shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. He's a good boy, deserves a chance. They had reached her door, that awkward moment of parting where possibilities hung in the air between them. Propriety dictated a formal goodbye, perhaps a handshake at most. But after what they'd shared, such reserve felt artificial. Thank you, Nora said softly, not just for saving my life, but for showing me the kind of strength and kindness possible in this place. I came west seeking a new beginning, but I didn't expect to find. She paused, searching for words. Such inspiration. Zach removed his hat, holding it before him in a gesture both respectful and vulnerable. You give me too much credit, Miss Patterson. Nora, she corrected gently. After pulling me from a burning wagon, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. A smile touched his lips. Nora, he repeated, the single word carrying a warmth that sent a shiver through her despite the mild evening. How long, she asked, before your duties might bring you back to town? 2 weeks, he answered without hesitation, suggesting he'd already calculated it. Sooner if Mr. Cross has urgent business. I hope it's urgent then, Nora said with uncharacteristic boldness, then blushed at her own forwardness. Zach's expression softened into something she hadn't seen before, a tenderness that transformed his rugged features and made her heart race. So do I. Then, with a gentle tip of his hat, he bid her good night and turned to leave. Nora watched him walk away, silhouetted against the town's scattered lights, until he disappeared into the growing darkness. Inside her cottage, she moved to the window, drawn by an emotion too new and fragile to name. Out there in the vast Nebraska prairie, lightning had struck twice, once to destroy her possessions, and once to introduce her to a man who made her question everything she thought she wanted from her new life. As she prepared for bed, Nora realized that the fire that had threatened her life had also illuminated a path she would never have discovered otherwise. It was too soon to know where that path might lead, but for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt truly hopeful about the future. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Nora prepared for the start of the school term. She organized her salvaged teaching materials, familiarized herself with the school records left by her predecessor, and visited the homes of several students to introduce herself to families who hadn't attended the welcome supper. Nebraska City proved to be a welcoming community, though Nora quickly discerned its social hierarchies. The merchants and professionals formed one circle, the farmers another, and the laborers yet another. The ranch hands and cowboys occupied a curious position, respected for their skills and the economic importance of their work, yet viewed with a certain wariness by the more civilized town residents. Understanding this dynamic helped Nora better comprehend Zach's reserved manner during the church supper. He existed between worlds, trusted by his employer to handle business matters, yet still fundamentally a cowboy in the eyes of townsfolk. That he navigated these waters with dignity rather than resentment only increased her admiration. She saw Sam occasionally in town, the boy flourishing under the attention of Mr. Cross and the anticipation of ranch life. He proudly showed her his new boots when they arrived, explaining in great detail the different parts of the saddle he would eventually learn to use. Mr. Jenkins says I've got a good eye for horses, he informed her during one encounter outside the general store. Says I might make a fine wrangler someday if I study hard. And are you studying? Nora asked, aware that the boy's formal education had been neglected during his time with his uncle. Sam looked sheepish. Some. Mr. Cross says I've got to learn my figures if I want to advance at the ranch. Can't be a foreman someday without knowing how to keep proper counts and records. Perhaps you could join my classes once you're settled at the ranch, Nora suggested. Many of the ranch children ride in for school when their duties permit. The boy brightened at this idea. Mr. Jenkins would approve of that. He's always reading in the evenings when the other hands are playing cards or swapping tall tales. This glimpse into Zach's private habits intrigued Nora. What does he read? All sorts, Sam replied with a shrug. History books, newspapers when they come. He's got a book of poetry he keeps in his saddlebag, though he'd probably skin me for telling you that. The image of Zach reading poetry by lamplight after a day's hard labor added yet another layer to Nora's understanding of him. This was no simple cowboy, but a complex man with depths she'd only begun to fathom. The day school began brought both excitement and anxiety. 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age filed into the schoolhouse, regarding their new teacher with expressions varying from curiosity to trepidation to outright mischief. Nora met each gaze calmly, projecting confidence despite her inner nervousness. "Good morning," she greeted them. "I am Miss Patterson, and I'm honored to be your teacher." The first day went remarkably smoothly, with only minor disruptions as she assessed each student's educational level and established classroom procedures. By the end of the week, Nora had settled into a rhythm that felt both challenging and deeply satisfying. The children, for the most part, responded well to her blend of discipline and encouragement. Through it all, her thoughts often strayed to Zach. Would he truly return to town as promised? And if he did, what then? She'd come to Nebraska City seeking independence and purpose after the betrayal of her fiancé. Allowing her heart to become engaged again, particularly with someone whose life was so different from hers, seemed risky at best. Yet when Saturday arrived, marking 2 weeks since Zach's departure, Nora found herself taking extra care with her appearance before walking to town for her weekly shopping. She chose her green dress, which brought out the highlights in her dark hair, and arranged her curls with more attention than usual beneath her modest bonnet. The general store was busy with weekend shoppers when Nora entered, basket in hand. She greeted several parents of her students as she selected the items on her list, careful to keep her purchases minimal given her still recovering finances. She was examining fabric for a new shirtwaist when the store's bell jangled, and a hush briefly fell over the chattering customers. Glancing up, Nora's heart leapt at the sight of Zach standing in the doorway, scanning the store until his eyes found hers. The smile that transformed his features made her momentarily forget her surroundings. He looked different somehow, still very much the cowboy in his practical clothing and boots. But there was a freshness to his appearance that suggested special effort had been made. He made his way to her, nodding politely to those he passed, seemingly oblivious to the speculative glances that followed him. "Miss Patterson," he greeted her formally, though his eyes conveyed a warmth that was anything but formal. "I hope I find you well." "Mr. Jenkins," she replied, equally proper while her pulse raced traitorously. "What a pleasant surprise. I trust all is well at the Cross T." "Very well, thank you." He glanced at the fabric she held. "That shade suits you." The simple compliment brought heat to her cheeks. "Thank you. I'm considering it for a new shirtwaist. My wardrobe remained somewhat limited after the fire." "I have news of Sam," Zach continued, wisely changing the subject as several nearby shoppers made little effort to hide their interest in the exchange. "He settled in well at the ranch." The foreman's wife has taken him under her wing, and he's showing real aptitude with the younger stock. I'm so pleased to hear it, Nora said sincerely. He mentioned your suggestion that he might attend school when duties permit. Education matters, Zach stated simply. Mr. Cross agrees. He's arranging for several of the ranch children to ride in together starting next week, Sam included. Their conversation continued in this public, proper vein until Nora had completed her purchases. As they exited the store together, Zach hesitated, then spoke in a lower tone that wouldn't carry to passers-by. I was hoping I might call on you properly, he said, a hint of uncertainty in his usually confident manner. This evening, if you're amenable. There are matters I'd like to discuss away from curious ears. The formal request to call the traditional beginning of courtship sent a thrill through Nora that she couldn't quite suppress. I would welcome your visit, she replied, striving for composure. Shall we say 7 o'clock? The evening couldn't arrive fast enough. Nora spent the afternoon in a state of nervous anticipation, preparing her small cottage for a visitor and wondering what matters Zach wished to discuss. She baked cookies using precious ingredients from her limited pantry, brewed fresh coffee, and arranged her sitting area to best advantage. Precisely at 7, a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Zach standing there, hat in hand with a small bouquet of wildflowers. These grow near the creek on Cross T land, he explained, offering them with a hint of self-consciousness. I thought they might brighten your cottage. They're beautiful, Nora said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Please come in. As she arranged the flowers in a jar of water, Nora observed how Zach's tall frame seemed to fill her small sitting room, making it appear even more modest than it was. Yet he moved with careful respect for her space, seating himself only when invited and accepting coffee with appreciative courtesy. Your cottage is very nice, he commented, glancing around at the simple furnishings she'd enhanced with small personal touches: a colorful quilt, a vase of dried flowers, books arranged on a small shelf. It suits me well, Nora replied. The school board has been most generous. And how are your quarters at the ranch? Comfortable enough. The bunkhouse isn't fancy, but it's solid and warm. He hesitated, then added, though Mr. Cross has offered me use of the old foreman's cabin. It stands empty since Bill Morgan moved into the main house after his promotion. The implication wasn't lost on Nora. A cabin of his own represented a step toward permanence and independence. It suggested Zach was putting down roots, something she gathered he hadn't done much of since the war. That sounds like a significant opportunity, she observed. It is. He sipped his coffee, then set the cup aside, his expression turning serious. Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss. Nora's heart quickened. Yes, Mr. Cross is expanding operations, Zach explained. He's purchased additional land closer to town and plans to develop it for breeding stock rather than regular herds. He's asked me to oversee the operation. That's wonderful, Nora said warmly. He clearly values your abilities. It would mean being based at the new property, Zach continued, his blue eyes intent on hers. Just 3 miles from town, close enough to. He paused, choosing his words carefully to make regular visits convenient. Understanding dawned. This wasn't merely news of a professional advancement. It was Zach's way of telling her that their geographic separation would soon be significantly reduced. When would this change occur? Nora asked, trying to maintain composure despite the hope blooming in her chest. Construction on the new building starts next month. I'd move there by early winter. He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. Nora, I know we've known each other only briefly, and I understand you came west to establish independence, not to what? She prompted when he faltered. Zach took a deep breath. Not to entertain the attentions of a cowboy with little to offer beyond hard work and honest intentions. The vulnerable honesty of his statement moved her deeply. "You underestimate what those qualities are worth, Zach," she said softly. "Especially to someone who once trusted a man with neither." A flicker of emotion crossed his features, hope mingled with uncertainty. "I'm not asking for promises," he clarified. "Only permission to call on you properly when my duties allow. To see if what I believe is growing between us might flourish with time and better acquaintance." The formal request, delivered with such sincerity, touched Nora more than flowery declarations or grand gestures ever could. This was a man who respected her independence, who sought to build something genuine rather than rush headlong into passion. "I would like that very much," she answered, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. Relief and happiness transformed Zach's expression. "Thank you." The remainder of his visit passed in more ordinary conversation, news of the ranch, her experiences with the school children, developments in town. Yet underlying it all was a new awareness, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. When he finally rose to leave, adherence to propriety having limited his stay to a respectable duration, Nora walked with him to the door. "I'll be in town again next Saturday," he told her. "Would you consider accompanying me to dinner at the hotel restaurant? I understand it's quite acceptable for the schoolteacher to dine there with a friend." "I would be delighted," Nora replied, pleased at his consideration for her reputation. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the soft lamplight from within, they regarded each other with a mix of newfound understanding and long-standing attraction. Propriety dictated a handshake at most, but when Zach gently took her hand in his, he held it a moment longer than strictly necessary, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. "Until Saturday, then," he said, his voice lower than before. "Until Saturday," she echoed, reluctant to reclaim her hand from his warm grasp. After he'd gone, Nora remained at the door for several moments, watching his tall figure disappear into the evening shadows. The practical part of her mind cautioned against moving too quickly, against allowing her heart to become engaged with a man whose life was so different from what she'd planned. Yet a deeper wisdom whispered that sometimes life's most precious gifts came unexpected, wrapped in packages one would never have thought to request. Her burning wagon had seemed a disaster, but from those flames had emerged a possibility for happiness she'd never anticipated. As autumn progressed into winter, Zach's visits to Nebraska City became a regular part of Nora's life. Each Saturday, weather permitting, he would arrive in town on ranch business, concluding his errands in time to call on her in the afternoon or escort her to dinner at the hotel. Their courtship unfolded with deliberate care, each encounter deepening their understanding of one another. Nora shared stories of her Philadelphia childhood, her parents' loving marriage, and the pain of their loss. Zach gradually revealed more of his own past, his Missouri upbringing, the brutal realities of the war that had left both physical and emotional scars, and his aimless wandering afterward, until Thomas Cross offered him purpose and direction. "I never thought I'd stay anywhere permanent again," he confessed during a winter afternoon as they sat beside the fire in her cottage, snow falling gently outside. "The war took something from me, not just strength in this leg, but faith in being able to build anything lasting." "And now?" Nora asked, watching the firelight play across his thoughtful features. A smile touched his lips as he met her gaze. "Now I find myself planning fences and calculating grazing rotations for land I haven't even seen yet, thinking about next year and the year after." The implication was clear, though delicately unstated. Zach was putting down roots, and his vision of the future increasingly included her. Construction on the new ranch property progressed despite winter weather, with Zach dividing his time between the main cross-T operation and the developing facilities closer to town. By early February, the essential buildings were complete enough for occupation, and Zach moved into the small but sturdy cabin that would serve as his residence. His proximity to town allowed for more frequent visits, sometimes brief stops to deliver messages or supplies, other times longer social calls properly chaperoned by the presence of Sam or other ranch children who now regularly attended Nora's school. The town observed their developing relationship with the usual mix of approval and speculation. Most viewed the schoolteacher and the respected ranch foreman as a suitable match, though a few of the more socially ambitious mothers who had hoped to interest Nora in their merchant sons expressed disappointment behind closed doors. Nora found herself caring less about such opinions with each passing week. Her life in Nebraska City had developed a richness and purpose she'd never experienced in Philadelphia. Her students were progressing well, her position in the community was secure, and her heart was engaged with a man whose character proved more admirable with each new revelation. Spring brought renewed activity to both the school and the ranch. As the weather improved, Zach invited Nora to visit the new ranch property, properly chaperoned by Sam and two other school children who lived there. "It's not much to look at yet," he apologized as they rode in the wagon he'd brought specifically for her comfort, rather than asking her to ride horseback. "But it will be, come summer." Nora found the developing ranch fascinating. Though smaller than the main cross-T operation, it showed careful planning and attention to detail. The breeding stock select cattle chosen for their superior qualities grazed in specially prepared pastures. The buildings, though simple, were soundly constructed and arranged with an eye toward efficiency. "Mr. Cross must have great faith in your abilities," she observed as Zach showed her around, the children having run off to examine a new foal born just days earlier. "He's giving me a chance to prove myself," Zach acknowledged. "If the breeding program succeeds, it could significantly increase the ranch's profitability." "And what would success mean for you?" Nora asked, sensing there was more to this opportunity than professional satisfaction. Zach stopped walking, turning to face her directly. The spring sunlight illuminated his features, showing both the weathered lines of a man who worked outdoors and the underlying strength of character that had drawn her to him. "Mr. Cross has offered me a partnership stake," he said quietly. "Not in the whole operation, that's too much to hope for, but in this property specifically. If we meet the targets for the first 2 years, I'd own 20%. The significance wasn't lost on Nora. This wasn't merely career advancement. It represented a path to property ownership and financial security, things Zach had likely never anticipated after the war left him damaged and directionless. "That's wonderful," she said sincerely, reaching out to touch his arm in a rare gesture of physical contact. "I'm so proud of what you're building here." Zach's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "I'm building it with purpose, Nora." The unspoken meaning hung between them, clear yet still tentative. Neither was ready to articulate the future they both increasingly envisioned, but it existed nonetheless, taking shape with each shared moment and deepening connection. That evening, as Zach drove her back to town in the gathering twilight, a comfortable silence settled between them. The children had fallen asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from their day of exploration and play. "Thank you for showing me your work," Nora said as the lights of Nebraska City appeared on the horizon. "I understand now why you speak of it with such pride." "There's still much to do," Zach replied, though pleasure at her approval was evident in his voice. "There always is, with things worth building." He glanced at her, catching the deeper meaning in her words. "Yes," he agreed softly. "The worthwhile things take time." The spring term of school ended in early May, with Nora's students demonstrating remarkable progress under her guidance. The school board, pleased with her results, formally offered to renew her contract for the following year with a modest increase in salary. "We hope you plan to remain with us, Miss Patterson," the board chairman told her. "The children have thrived under your instruction, and the parents speak highly of your methods." "I intend to stay," Nora confirmed, her decision made with confidence. Nebraska City had become home in ways Philadelphia never had, offering purpose, community, and the possibility of a future filled with love. That future took more definite shape the following Sunday, when Zach arrived at her cottage dressed in his finest clothes, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, and an expression of nervous determination on his face. "I was hoping you might accompany me for a drive," he said after she invited him in. "There's something I'd like to show you." Intrigued, Nora agreed, changing into a pretty spring dress before joining him in the waiting buggy, not the ranch wagon but a smart two-person buggy she'd never seen before. "This is new," she observed as he helped her up. "Borrowed," Zach clarified, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "From Mr. Cross. He insisted when I told him my plans for today." They drove not toward the ranch but in the opposite direction, following the river for about a mile before turning onto a less traveled road that led to a gentle rise overlooking both the river and the distant town. At the crest of the rise stood a magnificent old oak tree, its spring foliage creating a canopy of green against the blue sky. Beneath it, Zach had spread a blanket and set out a picnic basket. "I had help with the food," he admitted as he assisted her down from the buggy. "Mrs. Morgan at the ranch packed it for us. She's a fine cook." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Nora deeply. "It's beautiful here," she said, taking in the panoramic view. "How did you find this spot?" "Painter found it, actually," Zach explained with a smile, referencing his faithful horse who was now contentedly grazing nearby. "I was checking boundary lines last month, and he decided to head uphill. Seemed like he knew something I didn't." They settled on the blanket, enjoying the simple but delicious meal Mrs. Morgan had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, preserves, and a small cake for dessert. Throughout the meal, Nora sensed Zach's unusual tension, though he maintained conversation about ordinary matters: ranch developments, town news, plans for the summer. It was only after they'd finished eating and sat enjoying the view that he finally revealed his purpose. "Nora," he began, turning to face her directly, "I brought you here because I wanted a special place for what I need to ask you." Her heart began to race, though she maintained an outward calm. "Yes." He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I know I'm not what your parents might have envisioned for you. I'm not a businessman or a professional man. My hands are rough, and I'll never be truly comfortable in fine surroundings." "Zach," she started, but he gently raised a hand. "Please, let me finish while I still have the courage." His blue eyes held hers, vulnerable yet determined. "What I can promise you is this. I will work every day to be worthy of your trust. I will respect your independence and your intelligence. I will share with you whatever prosperity I manage to build. And I will love you faithfully for as long as I live." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful gold ring set with a small diamond. "Nora Patterson, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Emotion welled in Nora's throat, momentarily robbing her of speech. This man, who had pulled her from flames on a stormy night, was now offering her a lifetime of safety, respect, and love, everything she'd once thought lost to her forever. "Yes," she managed finally, her voice thick with feeling. "Yes, Zachary Jenkins, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he carefully slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, gleaming in the spring sunlight like a promise made tangible. "I had it sized based on a guess," he admitted. "And the diamond isn't large, it's perfect," Nora interrupted, gazing at the ring with wonder. "Absolutely perfect." Propriety still governed their actions, even in this intimate moment, but when Zach gently took her hand and pressed his lips to it in reverence, Nora felt the gesture more deeply than any passionate embrace. "When?" he asked simply. "Summer," she suggested. "After the spring roundup is complete and before the fall term begins." "Would August suit?" "August would be perfect," he agreed, his smile warming her more effectively than the spring sunshine. They were married on a perfect August morning in the Nebraska City Church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Thomas Cross stood as Zach's best man, while Mrs. Wilson, who had remained in correspondence with Nora since delivering her safely to Nebraska City, traveled back to serve as matron of honor. Sam, now a confident young man after nearly a year at the Cross T, proudly escorted Nora down the aisle in place of the father she'd lost. Her dress, sewn by her own hand with help from several town women, was elegant in its simplicity, adorned with lace sent by her few remaining relatives in Philadelphia who couldn't attend, but wished to contribute to the celebration. Zach waited at the altar, his expression a mix of awe and devotion that brought tears to Nora's eyes. He'd never looked more handsome than he did in his new suit, standing tall and straight despite the old war injury that occasionally troubled him in cold weather. Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt, exchanged with clear voices that carried to the back of the crowded church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the congregation reflected the community's wholehearted embrace of their union. The celebration afterward, held at the town hall, featured food contributed by nearly every household in Nebraska City, alongside a magnificent feast provided by Thomas Cross. Dancing continued well into the evening, with Zach surprising Nora by leading her confidently through several dances despite his usual reserve at social gatherings. "Where did you learn to dance so well?" she asked, delighted, as they moved through a waltz. A hint of color touched his cheeks. "Mrs. Morgan's been giving me lessons at the ranch. Said no wife of mine should have to suffer through a wedding with a husband who couldn't properly lead a dance." The revelation of this secret preparation, undertaken solely for her pleasure, filled Nora's heart to overflowing. "I love you, Zachary Jenkins," she whispered, protocol be damned. His eyes darkened with emotion. "And I love you, Nora Jenkins." Their new home awaited them, not Zach's small cabin, but a proper house built on the breeding ranch property, another wedding gift from the generous Thomas Cross. Though modest by Eastern standards, it represented luxury on the prairie. 3 rooms downstairs, including a kitchen with a proper stove, 2 bedrooms upstairs, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the structure. Zach carried Nora across the threshold as tradition demanded, setting her gently on her feet in what would be their home for years to come. The furniture was a mix of practical pieces provided by Cross and special items Nora had selected or been given as wedding gifts: a rocking chair from the school board, curtains sewn by the church ladies, a magnificent quilt crafted by Mrs. Morgan. As twilight deepened into night, the nervous anticipation that had sustained them through the day transformed into a deeper emotion. Alone for the first time as husband and wife, They discovered in each other's arms the perfect culmination of the journey that had begun in fire and danger. Later, as moonlight streamed through the curtains of their bedroom, Nora rested her head on Zach's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked softly. "If my wagon hadn't caught fire that night?" Zach's arms tightened around her. "I try not to dwell on what might have been," he admitted, "but I thank God every day that I was there when it happened." "As do I," Nora whispered, raising herself to look into his beloved face. "Who would have thought that losing everything would lead me to gaining what matters most?" In the years that followed, their partnership deepened and flourished. The breeding operation exceeded even Thomas Cross's optimistic projections, establishing Zach as one of the most respected cattlemen in the territory. Nora continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a son they named Thomas after their benefactor, though everyone called him Tommy from the start. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and then another son, William, completed their family. Their home expanded accordingly, with Zach adding rooms as needed, always with an eye toward both practicality and beauty. Nora found ways to continue contributing to education, even while raising their children, hosting a reading circle for ranch families, and eventually serving on the school board herself. When the children were old enough for school, she occasionally substituted for teachers who were ill or on leave, keeping her hand in the profession she loved. Sam remained part of their extended family, advancing from ranch hand to trusted assistant as Zach's responsibilities grew. When he turned 20, Zach helped him stake a claim on adjoining land, allowing him to begin building his own future while continuing to work with the Cross T operation. Through it all, the prosperous years and the lean ones, the joys of watching their children grow, and the sorrows that inevitably touched their lives, Zach and Nora's bond remained unshakable. Their love, forged in the crucible of that stormy night when fire threatened to take everything, proved stronger than any challenge life presented. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zach surprised Nora with a journey back to the oak tree where he'd proposed. Now partners in the entire Cross T operation following Thomas Cross's retirement, they could afford such indulgences as an afternoon away from responsibilities. "It hasn't changed," Nora observed as they spread a blanket beneath the massive tree, now accompanied by a teenage Tommy who had driven them in the family buggy before tactfully wandering off to explore the river and give his parents privacy. "Some things shouldn't change," Zach replied, his hair now streaked with silver though his blue eyes remained as clear and direct as the day they'd met. "Like how much I love you." Nora leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "Do you remember what you said to me that night? When you pulled me from the wagon," a smile touched his lips. "I believe I said, 'Hold on, madam, I've got you.'" "You did," she confirmed, taking his hand in hers, fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "And you've had me ever since." Zach turned, pressing a kiss to her forehead with a tenderness that 20 years of marriage had only deepened. "And I always will." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the Nebraska sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nora reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. The fire that had once threatened to destroy her future had instead illuminated a path to happiness greater than she'd ever dared imagine. Some might call it chance or fate, but Nora preferred to see it as divine providence that of all the travelers on the storm-swept prairie that night, it had been Zachary Jenkins who spotted the flames of her burning wagon and pulled her to safety. From those desperate moments had grown a love strong enough to weather any storm, bright enough to light their way through any darkness. And in the peaceful beauty of the Nebraska sunset, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Nora knew with absolute certainty that some fires once kindled were never meant to die.